Welcome back to the top 100 comics of 2017 countdown. Today we are going to be covering number 50 through 26. In case you missed part 1, in which we went through the first 50 candidates. That's number 100 through 51. Then a card for it will be popping up right now, or you can wait until the end of the video, in which there will be a card at the end as well. So if you want to check that out, then make sure you click on that and then come back whenever you're all caught up, because now it's time for number 50. All new Guardians of the Galaxy. I was a big fan of the Abnett and Landing run on Guardians of the Galaxy. It was the run that came in here and redefined this team, made them the modern day lineup that everyone has come to know, but it wasn't the fun, jokey, pop culture referencing team that we all know from the movies. It was a comic that dealt way more with the bizarre creative landscape of Marvel space comics. And ever since that series ended, all the other Guardians of the Galaxy series, yeah, they haven't been able to capture that same tone. They've been trying to be a lot more fun and jokey, just like the films. But this year, when Jerry Dugan took over writing Guardians of the Galaxy, he showed you don't have to choose one or the other. Yes, you can have this be a team full of goofballs, but you can have it be a team full of goofballs with heart. A team that really does go through many struggles and challenges and really do have messed up backstories. And you can then have this team full of complex goofballs go on an adventure that is so trippy, so mind-bending, that it is worthy of being a new installment in the long history of Marvel space series. Number 49, Saga. Yes, it's that time once again in which I come in here and I apologize to everyone for not liking Saga quite as much as everyone else. Don't get me wrong, I still really enjoy Saga. I think it's a great book. It would not be on this list, let alone this high on the list, if I didn't think that. However, almost everyone else out there always puts Saga in their top 10, if not even top 5, or sometimes even number 1 on their list of favorite comics of the year. It's been that way ever since this series came out, and I used to be the same way, but I'll be honest with you, as time goes on, the shine of this series has started to wear off on me. However, I will say, this year, I actually did start to get back into it. I did start to get intrigued with the series again. The stuff that they did this year, with them almost having a second child, and then the heartbreak that came from that, yeah, that actually did make me realize there is a lot that you can still do with this series. It was not starting to get stale. So even though I am not loving this book as much as everyone else is, it is still a book that has kept my interest, because this is one of the biggest space soap operas I've ever read. Number 48, Black Widow. Anytime that you put Mark Waid together with Chris Samney, they are bound to create something special, and the Black Widow series was no exception. In this series, they gave Black Widow some brand new villains, and honestly, I think they are great additions to her rogues gallery. Also, it actually really showed Black Widow going on what I would consider proper Marvel super spy missions. They had her going to the moon and meeting up with the weird ghost Nick Fury and running back into the Winter Soldier and having a great crossover with him. Honestly, I think that this was the Black Widow book that we needed after a while, just to remind us of how cool that character can be. Number 47, Winnebago Craveyard. This is a series about a family that is traveling across the country in their Winnebago. It breaks down, they have to stop in a small town, and this small town holds a dark secret. One of the things that I love about this book is that it is a quick read. I was able to run through all 4 issues in probably 20 minutes tops, and that actually adds to this book, because it is just about this family trying to escape from these crazy cult members that are running this town. They don't know the backstory to them. They don't know why they're doing this. But if you were in that situation, you wouldn't either. It would just be about survival. It would just be about escape. And this book was able to capture that feeling. It was able to give you that feeling of, I'm trapped in this town. It's a horror show. I need to get the fudge out of here, and I don't know if I'm gonna survive. Number 46, Batman and the Shadow. Having the characters of Batman and the Shadow actually cross over and meet for the first time is kind of a big deal, considering that Batman was actually heavily inspired by the Shadow, and this book fully embraces that. This book takes the backstory of the Shadow and the history of Batman and merges them in a way that actually really made me wish that these two characters existed in the same universe. As I was reading this, it almost felt like DC was trying to buy the rights to the Shadow because they had plans for how they could permanently fit him into the Batman mythos. And honestly, I'd be okay with them doing that because they did a wonderful job of putting him in there. And the Shadow has existed long before I was even born, and yet I've never really found myself interested in reading about this character, but this was the book that made me want to learn more. The Shadow is written as such an interesting character in this book, and anybody who has never come across him will probably agree with me when I say that I do want to know more about him now. Number 45, Exo Manowar. Eric has gone through many challenges in his time as Exo Manowar, including being kidnapped, taken into space, turned into a slave, then having to return his people back home, only to discover that hundreds of years have passed, and now he is stuck out of time in the present. Well, eventually, after going through all that, you're finally one day going to say, enough is enough, I gotta get out of here. This book shows us what happens when the proud, noble warrior Eric decides, I quit. And he just goes into space and he wants nothing more to do with anything. He finds a loving woman to settle down with, and he finds a little home that he can call his own, only to get dragged kicking and screaming back into another war that he wants nothing to do with, but this time he refuses to suit up in his giant magical space armor. So this is taking one of the most powerful characters in the Valiant universe and completely stripping him of his powers to show us, yeah, suit or no suit, Eric is still a hero, and he's still a badass. He's still a fighter, and he's about to go to war all over again. Number 44, The Defenders. This might be one of the last series that Brian Michael Bendis ever writes for Marvel Comics, and honestly, I'm totally okay with that because it means he's going out on a high note. Because this is one of the best things that he has written in years. Yes, when this book came about, I looked at like, oh, they're just doing it to tie it into the TV show. But you know what? A lot of times really great books are created just because they're tie-ins to TV shows or movies. And this is a perfect example of it. The relationship and the connection and the interactions that we see going on between Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, and Daredevil are all captured wonderfully well. But throwing the Punisher and Deadpool in there are such wonderful X factors to this story. It reminds us Brian Michael Bendis knows how to write street-level heroes. And speaking of really darn good books that were created solely to tie into other properties in other mediums, number 43, Injustice 2. I did not read the Injustice comic when it first came out. I had to hear for years from people how good that series was before I finally decided to check it out. And yeah, it was really darn good, up until about the time that Tom Taylor left the book. But for Injustice 2, Tom Taylor came back, and again, I was reluctant once more because I looked at it and went, okay, with Injustice 1, you have all these years of build-up to the event that you can fill us in on. What are you going to do with Injustice 2? It picks up almost right after the end of Injustice 1. Oh, Tom Taylor has ideas. He has got tons of plans for these characters, and honestly, I'm enjoying the Injustice 2 universe more than the main DC universe at this point. And that's because Tom Taylor is able to perfectly capture the voice of every single one of these characters, while at the same time giving this book just the right amount of humor, tension, drama, and heart. There is a moment between Blue Beetle and Booster Gold in this series that is honestly one of my favorite moments between those two characters. And it's set in a video game tie-in universe. So again, just to say it, if you looked at this and thought, oh, it's a video game tie-in, I don't have to read that. Yeah, you don't have to read it, but if you're a fan of DC characters, you probably should. Number 42, Dark Knight's Metal. This is a series about an evil alternate reality called the Dark Multiverse, full of the worst possibilities of every DC character all brought to life, and they are trying to invade the main DC universe, and they're using Batman as their gateway to bring in their dark Batman god Barbatos, as well as all of his dark Batman sidekicks and apprentices. And yeah, you know what? Let's just call this book what it is. It is nothing but Batman fan fiction. It is basically just coming in here and going, hey, what if Batman was the Joker? And what if Batman was the Flash? And what if Batman was Doomsday? And they were all evil, and they were all coming to our universe. But here's the thing, that actually sounds like a fun fanfic. This book is able to actually kind of capture that tone, while at the same time, still being really dark and disturbing. And one of the reasons why Scott Snyder is able to pull all this off is because he knows how to write one thing more than anything, which is horror. He is a big horror junkie, and this is really his first attempt at writing the Cthulhu Old God style form of horror, but he is able to take that and merge it with his love of Batman and the DC universe, and it is able to capture those two tones and blend them together in a way that I did not think would work, but it's actually become one of my favorite big crossover events I've read in a long time. Number 41, Hawkeye. Kelly Thompson was able to take Kate Bishop, and by removing her from Clint Barton and from New York and setting her in her own town with her own cast of characters, she was able to flesh out this character in a way that no other writer really has. But at the same time, she didn't just explore this character, she explored this character in style. This is one of the best looking series out there, and the style of this book is able to perfectly blend with the humor and the heart that Kelly Thompson is able to inject into this character. I love that she took this character who was always so positive, upbeat, and always had the perfect right thing to say, and was able to explore that no, she's also kind of screwed up herself. She doesn't always know what she's doing. She constantly gets herself into trouble, but you know what? That's kind of what Hawkeye is. This book is able to perfectly capture what I always loved about the character of Hawkeye, whether that be Clint Barton or in this case, Kate Bishop. Number 40, Old Guard. This is a series from Greg Rucka that is all about a band of mercenaries who all happen to be immortal, and they have been alive for so long that they're kind of sick of it. But what are they gonna do? It's not like they can die, except for when they can. Yeah, you see, the idea of immortals who have been alive for so long that they've gotten tired of their existence, that's nothing new. We've seen what it's like to be an immortal and to just be bored by it. That's been in many stories. But in this world, there have been immortals who have actually died. And that actually creates a great X factor, because in this story, they are trying to hunt down these people who have evidence that they're immortal, and they know that if that evidence gets out there, then they will never be free again. They will always be hunted. But while they're on this mission, you always have that thought in the back of your head. It's like, oh yeah, didn't you mention that every now and again, one of you will die, but you don't know why? It is possible for you to just not heal back from a wound, or for something to happen and for you to not recover from it. Yeah, that could actually happen in here. You never look at this and think, oh, they're fine, they're immortals, nothing can happen to them. You realize maybe something will. And if something does happen to them, maybe that would be for the best because they don't want to keep going on living. This actually takes a concept that we've seen before, that idea of immortals living for so long that they've gotten bored with it, and it's able to do something completely new with it. Number 39, Shirtless Bear Fighter. If you have been watching all of our top 100 countdowns so far, then you know that one of my favorite things in comics is when someone just tries to get crazy with a concept. However, there's an art to being crazy. You can't just throw every insane thing you can think of at the wall and see what sticks. No, you have to establish the rules of your crazy world. You have to establish the tone of your crazy world. You can't have one insane thing come in here and then have something else so completely differently insane come in that they start clashing together. You have to establish what kind of a crazy world you're building, and then you have to stick in that lane. Shirtless Bear Fighter does that like it's an art form. This is a story about a man who was raised by bears and learned to fight like bears, but then when the bears betrayed him, he decided to turn on them and fight every bear he could find, and now he is called back into action one last time as bears start trampling across the world, and it's all the master plan of the guy who runs the Charmin toilet paper company. Okay, it's not actually the Charmin toilet paper company, but it's a toilet paper company that uses bears as its mascot. You all know what it's referencing. This book is the perfect example of how to take an absolutely insane concept, but establish a world where it makes sense. And every single time that something brand new pops up that is also completely nuts, it doesn't feel out of place. It still completely matches the tone of everything else that's been established so far in this series. If you have ever wanted to write a book that is just balls to the walls insane, this is a book that you need to read in order to understand how that's done. But at the same time, about halfway through this series, it starts to get into the backstory of Shirtless Bear Fighter, of everything that went wrong, of what turned him against the bears, about his family. And I found myself actually looking at this book at that point going, am I actually getting invested in this story? Am I looking at this book not just for laughs anymore, but am I actually starting to care about these characters? It is really shocking to me that this book was able to take a concept that is just one giant joke and then was able to give it enough depth that I wanted to continue reading this series beyond just for laughs. I actually cared about what happened to these characters and not just because it was funny. Number 38, All New Wolverine. Remember a couple books ago when I was talking about what an amazing job Tom Taylor was doing with DC characters in Injustice 2? All New Wolverine proves he can do that with Marvel characters as well. Laura Kinney is a character with a lot of trauma in her past, and Tom Taylor this year started using that trauma in order to craft brand new stories that really did push her character forward. For example, one of the earliest stories we got this year was when a virus outbroke all across New York, and Laura Kinney was the cure for it. She was able to absorb this virus into herself and have her healing factor fight the virus off. It was a great opportunity to show what happens when this character, who was designed only to be a killer, actually was able to heal, when she was able to save the day without having to stab anyone. But beyond just that, we also got to see a lot more of her little sister Gabby this year, and oh my gosh, she is one of the breakout stars of the year. This is the year in which she actually started to go out there into the field, actually started to be a hero herself, even got her own code name, and she added so much life to this book. A book just starring Laura Kinney still would have made it onto this list because of how well Tom Taylor is able to capture her voice and all the stuff going through her head. But adding that slight sense of humor from Gabby in here is what this book needed to make it this excellent. Number 37, Motor Girl. This is the newest series from Terry Moore, the same person who created Strangers in Paradise and Rachel Rising. Every single time that he puts out a brand new series, it's always worth taking a look at, but I didn't get to this book until the tail end of the year, and I am so mad that I did not read this earlier. I read this book after we had already finished our top 10 characters of the year list. If I had read that before this, the protagonist of this series, Sam, easily would have gone on that list. This is all about a mechanic who works in a junkyard, but before that, she was a soldier off in Iraq, and she got kidnapped and was beaten and tortured for days, weeks, months. Even to this day, she still has unhealable scars all over her back from the torture that she had to endure, and she actually suffered massive trauma through all that. And because of that trauma, she actually kind of developed an imaginary friend. She has a giant gorilla that she talks to at all times. And here's the thing that takes this from a quirky, fun concept and actually makes it really emotional. She is also suffering from crippling headaches, ones that are so strong that she can't even get up at times. And she knows what that is. And even her imaginary friend knows what that is. But if she gets that dealt with, the imaginary friend might go away. This is one of the most touching friendships I have seen in any book in my life, and you don't want it to disappear, even though it sticking around could possibly kill this character. And one of the reasons they're able to accomplish that so well is because you really do get a sense that this imaginary friend is real. He has his own personality, and it is a perfect foil to Sam's personality. They go together like peanut butter and jelly. You don't want to see them get separated. There is a moment in here in which Sam can't get up. The headaches are too bad. She is just stuck in a chair all night long in pain. And you see the imaginary friend just standing there next to her, and he is suffering as well. He doesn't know what to do. He wants to help her, but he knows nothing he does can help her. And you just see the pain in his face as he realizes what this all means. He realizes what's happening to her, and he doesn't know what they should do about it, and he's not even there. So take all of that heart, all of that friendship, that amazing relationship in this book, and then throw in there some really funny, incompetent henchmen who are trying to get her to sell the junkyard, and some space invaders from another planet. Yeah, it gets kind of weird in here. And this is one of the best books I have ever read from Terry Moore, a guy who keeps putting out amazing books. Number 36, Secret Warriors. I had no interest in this title at all until I heard that Matthew Rosenberg was working on it, one of the biggest rising stars in the comic book industry today, and this is a book that proves why he deserves that title. Secret Warriors is all about a ragtag band of Inhumans having to join together to go off and fight Steve Rogers' evil secret empire, but then they keep getting called back together over and over again to go on one mission after another. It is a very odd pairing when you have characters like Miss Marvel, Quake, Moon Girl, Inferno, and Karnak, but Matthew Rosenberg on this book proves he knows how to write character interactions better than almost anybody working in the industry today. As I said, this is a book where they had to face off against Hydra, Mr. Sinister, the Dark Beast, but they could have just been sitting down for a picnic. It did not matter what they were doing in this book. Hell, in the final issue, they all just sit down to play a board game. Matthew Rosenberg always had the perfect thing for them to do. He always wrote the best interactions you could possibly imagine for whatever situation they are in. Heck, the dialogue between Moon Girl and Karnak alone made me just want them to write a brand new Marvel team-up series starring those two. He was able to take characters I could never imagine together and make it impossible for me to imagine them apart. Number 35, Moon Knight. Max Bemis started his run on Moon Knight this year, and so far it's pretty darn decent. I've been enjoying it, but that's not what gets Moon Knight on the list. When I talk about Moon Knight, I am talking about the finale to Jeff Lemire's run on this character, which was so good. I believe it was probably in our top 10 last year. I might be wrong about that, but it was definitely in the top 20 somewhere. But even though Jeff Lemire left that title this year, he went out in style because his final storyline was retelling the origin story of Mark Spector and Moon Knight. And after everything that's happened to Moon Knight over the past couple of years, all the changes that have been made to that character, we kind of needed someone to do that. We needed someone to come in here and go, this is what it was like for this guy living with this mental illness. This is what it was like for him growing up with split personalities. And the way that they were able to establish that, going all the way back to his childhood and exploring how his parents felt about that and what kind of an impact that made on him as he was growing up and how that eventually led him to the man that we know today. Yeah, that was all necessary information, and Jeff Lemire handled it pretty much as well as could be imagined. It was one of the best retellings of this character's origin story I think I've ever experienced, and it came at a time when we really did need to see that. Number 34, California Dreamin'. This is the biography of Cass Elliot, aka Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas. Now, I will admit, I actually didn't really know anything about Mama Cass. Heck, I barely even know that the Mamas and the Papas were a thing. All I knew about Mama Cass was about her unfortunate end, so when I started reading this, it was all pretty much new information to me, and they actually did a great job of making me realize, oh, this is what made this person unique. This is what made her such a dynamic figure, and they did that in a very interesting way. It's something that I've never really seen done in a biography. Every single chapter of this book tells the story of Cass Elliot from the point of view of someone completely different. It tells us how everyone else looked at Cass Elliot as she grew up, whether it be her other sisters, her parents, her schoolmates, her best friend. We got to see her as she grew up through every stage of her life, but through the eyes of someone else, and that was able to paint one of the most complex pictures of a character I've ever seen in a biography, because yeah, everyone acts differently around different people. So this was able to show us the different faces that this person wore depending on who she was interacting with. In one chapter, we got to see her through the eyes of one of her classmates, and they looked at her like she was this big dynamic figure. She was full of life and energy and had an amazing sense of humor. And yeah, as I was reading that, I was like, wow, this sounds like one of the coolest people I've ever met. But then in the next chapter, we see her through the eyes of her best friend, and around her best friend, she starts to drop her guard. We start to see some insecurities about her, some doubts that she has, and it really does paint a picture of a rather complex person. So yes, I think that this was a marvelous biography, especially if you are a fan of Cass Elliot and of the Mamas and the Papas, but even if you don't know anything about them at all, like I did, it is a book that will make you realize, oh, this is why the world fell in love with this person. This is why she was such a dynamic figure, but at the same time, she was a human being. Number 33, Deadpool. Now I'm including the Deadpool run right up until Marvel Legacy, and then when it got retitled as Despicable Deadpool right after that because it was being written by the same person, and the quality of the work continued on from one series into the next. Now, I've been putting Deadpool on this list for about the past 2 years straight, and that's because Jerry Dugan does a wonderful job writing this character. He understands that Deadpool is not just a non-stop joke machine, he also has a lot of depth to him. He is also a guy who is suffering from a lot of mental issues, and Jerry Dugan has not been afraid to explore that. However, the reason it gets this high on the list this year is because over the past couple years, we've also seen some big changes coming to the world of Deadpool. We've seen him become an Avenger. We've seen him becoming a celebrity. We've seen him become someone that little kids wanted to be. We have seen him go from dirty, grungy assassin to someone that is basically a household name. Kind of like what we've been seeing in the real world recently. However, this was the year that Jerry Dugan revealed to us, I've been setting up a house of cards all these years, and it's just high enough now that it's gonna look really amazing when I knock it all down. We got to watch as one of Deadpool's villains ended up attacking his friends and family, and Deadpool had to basically make a deal with the devil in order to save them, and now he owed a supervillain big, and he was going to be forced to pay. But at the same time, Captain America had really been standing up for Deadpool, really been saying what a great job Deadpool was doing and that everybody should start trusting Deadpool. Well, this was the year that Captain America was replaced by an evil Hydra agent, and Deadpool, like many other people, fell for it, and Deadpool started working for Hydra. He started going up against all the other heroes. He started working with the bad guys again, and by the time that he realized that this wasn't right, that he had been doing the wrong thing all this time, it was too late. His good name was destroyed. Everything that we had witnessed from Deadpool over the past couple years, of him becoming a hero, becoming an Avenger, really trying to turn his life around, it was all taken away in 1 year, and watching that happen, it was painful, but at the same time, it was kind of beautiful how well Jerry Dugan was able to pull it off. This is one of the biggest downfalls of a character I've ever seen, and man, it just broke your heart to have to watch that happen. Number 32, Batman the White Knight. I had no idea what to expect from this series when they said that they were going to make a Batman book where Batman went too far and now the Joker was the one who had to step in and stop him. That sounded interesting, but I was not expecting the book that we ended up getting. What Sean Murphy ended up turning in is one of the most politically charged and probably, I'd even say, intellectual books about Batman I've ever seen. This is a book that came in there and said, hey, what if instead of just punching the Joker in the face, we actually, I don't know, gave him the medication that he needed? What if we actually tried to help him? And we saw, yeah, he actually turned around and actually did kind of become a good guy. And he actually was able to reclaim his sanity. And after reclaiming his sanity, he was able to look at Batman and go, you're a vigilante. And the cops are allowing you to go around and beat the crap out of people. And they raised some pretty darn good questions about Batman. There's a moment in here in which Bullock has to turn to Gordon and tell him if a cop did to these criminals what Batman was doing to them, we would be written up and fired for police brutality. But because he dresses up like a bat, not only do we allow it, we put a giant signal on our roof to ask him for help? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, they kind of have a point about all that. And it gets so freaking smart with such little details that I never would have thought of. Joker actually getting medication and getting help. Hey, people have pitched that idea before. Batman going too far, and whether or not this counts as police brutality, that's a question that people have raised before. However, they actually bring up things in here like how the economy is affected by Batman. And I don't just mean, hey, does Batman destroy something in a fight and now people have to pay for it? They go into big details about, hey, is Batman running around a part of town? Well, nobody wants to live in that part of town, so it brings the property values down. So then the rich people all go in there, buy up that property, start kicking out the people who live there, so that way they can then turn the whole area around. Yeah, that's something that I never thought of when it comes to how Batman would affect society. And the way that they are able to put that in this story is so smart that, man, I am still honestly very impressed with this book. It might only be number 32 on our list, but just talking in terms of my personal favorite books of the year, the ones that actually really affected me and writes about the stuff that I love seeing in comic books, man, this would be in my personal top 10. Number 31, Aliens Dead Orbit. I love the Alien franchise, and by that I mean I love the first 2 movies. And then after that, I think they've all been going downhill, and it just felt so nice to see someone like James Stokoe, a very talented artist and storyteller, come in here and go, I know what works for the aliens. Not a whole bunch of backstory about where they came from, not some weird wood planet. No. What works for the aliens? Isolated, in space, you don't know what's happening, they're in the vents, they're coming for you, chest burster coming out, bing, bang, boom, done. This was just a return to the origin of the Alien franchise. It was what made the aliens work, and it was being told by an artist who was able to capture every single gory detail, was able to make every single empty hallway feel like something was crawling right there in the shadows. James Stokoe was the perfect choice for being able to capture an alien book, and honestly, I'm shocked that no one had thought to put him on a series like this sooner. Number 30, Realm. Do you know how many books come out every single year that are about the end of the world, are about post-apocalyptic adventures? There's so many of them, and so many of them are so similar. It's always zombies, it's always nuclear war, it's always a plague, it's one thing or another that we have just seen over and over again. Realm says, hey, what if this was a post-apocalyptic world, but the apocalypse was caused by Dungeons and Dragons? What if it was dragons, it was orcs, it was every type of monster that you could imagine from a Dungeon Master's Guide, dark wizards, everything, just running into our world, making it their own. Now we have to follow a group of survivors as they head from point A to point B. Again, a concept that we have seen in books like Walking Dead or so many other post-apocalyptic stories out there, except that when you suddenly throw in there giants and orcs and all kinds of other beasts, yeah, it actually does make it kind of original. It makes it kind of feel new. But also, these are darn good characters. They actually do add just the right amount of depth and variety to every single one of these characters to make you go, oh, they actually feel like a pretty fleshed out group of characters. These actually aren't just the exact same 3 characters over and over and over again. I actually really do get a sense like there is some depth to this world, that every single one of them has their own unique backstories. This book just started this year, but it's one of those books that reminds me of when I started reading Walking Dead in the first place, of when I started reading Manifest Destiny. It's one of those books that you can tell instantly, I'm going to get so attached to every single one of these characters, and every single one of them has their own big giant backstory that we are going to learn over the course of years. And typically when I get a book like this, I don't realize I'm reading something like that until about a year down the line. This book, the moment that you get to issue 2 or 3, you know exactly what you're in for. Number 29, Zojiquan. This is the story of a mother who recently lost her child, and she's going through so much trauma, so much heartbreak over it, which is made even worse when she's teleported away to a faraway planet, and now she has to struggle to survive in this bizarre wild jungle. But she comes across a race of primitive creatures that she decides to protect, and suddenly she starts jumping through time, hundreds of years in the future, and she watches as this species evolves, and she keeps popping up to give them lessons and teach them morals, only to then jump ahead again to find out that all her morals and lessons have been misinterpreted and has caused chaos that she has to correct. It's basically a look at what it's like to be God, to be responsible for an entire race where every single word you say is taken as law when you still aren't even over the loss of your own family. It's a brilliant, heartbreaking series, and if more than just 2 issues had come out this year, it would be much higher on this list. Number 28, Jean Grey. I have talked about this book on so many lists that we have done. I named Jean Grey one of the best characters of the year. I named the moment in issue 10 one of the best moments of the year. But for anybody who has not heard me just gush about this book so far, let me just go ahead and recap by saying this is a book about the time-displaced Jean Grey. The Jean Grey from the past who got thrown into the present, and she finds out that the Phoenix is coming back to Earth and is coming to possess her. However, the young Jean Grey never got possessed like her older self did. She doesn't know what that experience is like, but she knows it's bad and she knows she wants no part of it. So this entire series is her going from one character to another, trying to learn lessons. She goes to a group of people who were possessed by the Phoenix, and she discovers, yeah, it kind of wrecked them. You can't recover from that. You are always going to be destroyed if this happens to you. Your brain will never fully be able to recover. So, she comes to the only conclusion that she can make. If she can't handle the Phoenix possessing her, she has to fight the Phoenix. She has to fight the unstoppable force, the most powerful entity in the universe. So from that point, she then has to go from one hero to another, learning a lesson that she can use to fight the Phoenix. This is one of the best examples of how to write character growth and development I've read all year, because you have a starting point, you have an end point, and every single issue in between says, this is what we're trying to accomplish in this issue. This is the lesson she has to learn about how to fight the Phoenix in this issue from this person. So every single issue, there's a mini goal inside that issue that leads up to the bigger goal. This is a great example of how to show a character step by step, changing and developing and leading up to the end point. And that end point is one of the greatest football pullaways I've ever seen in any comic book. This book spent an entire year going, oh, this is what's happening. This is the goal we've been leading up to. You know that thing that we just said about how every single issue, it shows you step by step her getting closer to that goal of her having to fight the Phoenix? Oh boy, do we have a surprise for you here at the end. Yeah, this book already would have been on this list just simply because of how well it is able to show a character moving from point A to point B. But the giant surprise that it threw at us in issue number 10 is what gets it this high on the list. Number 27, Batman and Elmer Fudd. Now, before I continue, let me go ahead and address the giant elephant in the room, which is that I know that I said that in order to be counted for this list, 2 issues of your series had to have come out in 2017, but this was a one-shot. However, if you're one-shot, only 1 issue comes out. So that means that there can't be a second issue, so that's the exception to the rule. One-shots do count. I should also address the other elephant in the room, which is, oh my god, there's a Batman and Elmer Fudd crossover, and it's really damn good. This was the year in which DC decided they were going to do a series of one-shots that focused on their Looney Tunes properties, teaming up with their DC Comics properties. And some of them were okay, some of them weren't, but most of them didn't quite seem like they knew what they wanted to be. Did they want to be wacky and goofy like the Looney Tunes cartoons? Or did they want to be more serious and more mature like the DC comic books? And because most of these books didn't know what tone they wanted to go for, a lot of them kind of just seemed to be halfway in between both of them. They didn't quite know where to be funny, where to be serious. The Tom King Batman Elmer Fudd crossover was the one that got it just right. You had Elmer Fudd as a bounty hunter having to go into Gotham to hunt down Batman because Bugs Bunny ended up tricking him, although it's not quite Bugs Bunny, it is just this grifter, shady figure who is definitely meant to be Bugs Bunny. So you have this guy in the giant wacky hat, but he's got this really dark, tormented past, having to face off against Batman with a gun, the thing that Batman hates more than anything, but the gun sound effects all have Elmer Fudd's speech impediment to them. It's such a small detail, but like everything else in here, it was thought out so incredibly well. And it all leads up to a team-up between Batman and Elmer Fudd, where they have to go to this bar where the Scourge of Gotham hangs out, but everyone in this bar is a different Looney Tunes character, but as interpreted into a thuggish, street-level, hooligan-type character. And I just loved having to pick out every single person in that crowd to try and tell which Looney Tunes character they were trying to be. And it's just a montage of the two of them fighting these guys off, throwing out their goofy, wacky one-liners the whole time. Yeah, I have never seen a book that captured the craziness of Looney Tunes and the darkness of Batman at the same time in the same panels, as well as this book did. This is a book that should not have worked, and not only did it work, it was one of the best single issues of anything I've read this year. And at number 26, the last book that we are going to talk about today, Wicked and Divine. Now, I always liked Wicked and Divine, but I didn't love it quite as much as everyone else did out there. I always felt like, it's just not a book quite for me. Just the story that it's telling, the tone that it's trying to go for, it's just not the kind of stuff that I typically enjoy. However, last year, a rather large change came to that series. Because you see, that was the year in which all these gods decided to turn on the person who had brought them back to life after they learned about her dark evil plans, and now these gods kind of were free to just go about and do whatever they wanted to do. However, they still had to worry about this big dark evil entity that was on the horizon, and also that whole prophecy that they were going to die in just a few years. So now it was reaching that point in which they had to actually think about what they wanted to do about the limited future that they had left. And some of them started coming together, some of them started changing their roles, started changing their personalities. But overall, we got to see these characters really start to lose it. And that's what made this so interesting. There's a line at one moment in this series in which they say, yeah, most gods don't start bathing in the blood of those that are sacrificed for them in their first year. That typically happens later down the line, and it made you realize, oh, these gods are starting to lose it. This is what happens when these gods who we've been following as rock stars and really enjoying their adventures, yeah, what happens when the clock is ticking down and suddenly they're getting desperate and suddenly they're not playing around anymore? This was the year when Wicked and Divine took everything that it had built up over the past couple of years and said, yeah, time to knock this down. And as you can tell by our discussion about Deadpool, I actually kind of really dig it when I see a book do that. So I'm actually more excited now to read this book than I ever have been before, and it's because 2017 might have been the best year that this book has ever seen. Thank you guys for tuning in for part 2 of our look back at the top 100 comics of 2017. If you missed part 1, which is number 100 through 51, then it should be popping up as a title card right there. And if you want to see part 3, then make sure that you come back this weekend for number 25 through number 11, and then the day after that, it's the big finale. The top 10 comics of 2017. If you like this video, then make sure that you share it around the web. It's the best way to help our channel grow. And you can always follow me on Twitter, Twitch, and Tumblr at Professor Thorgy. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time.